Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning into this update. I'm Joshua Dobi. Well, it's happened. I'm talking about the election. Finally, we're beyond it. All of those dozens of mailers that hit your mailbox, the hundreds of television commercials, and I don't know if you're like me, but my cell phone was getting text messages pretty much nonstop in the weeks leading up to the election about asking for whom I was going to vote and if I had voted and would I change my mind if I had a chance to vote again, all of that kind of crazy stuff. Well, it's finally behind us. We finally have had the results of the election, and Donald Trump elected again into the Oval Office. And then with Congress, it appears, as of the time of this video, we're still getting some counts in the House, that there has been now a majority movement in the Senate to Republicans, and it appears, still counting again in the House, that there's a possibility for a House majority as well. So it looks like that there's going to be a Republican in the Oval Office, in the Republican majority in the Senate, Republican majority in the House as well. And now, before my Republican friends who are watching this get too excited, I got to remind you about how markets do when all of one party is in all three of those. It's not as good as when there's a mix of those kinds of things. So don't get too excited here yet. It's going to be interesting to see, more seriously, how the next couple of years take their shape, because there's going to be an intense amount of pressure on the Oval Office, on Congress with those majorities to move some things through there. And because the majorities are so slim, it's going to be very, very challenging for that to happen. I've heard a lot here over the last 48 hours or so about how certain agendas are going to be advanced and things are going to move forward. Folks, things don't move that way in Washington, D.C. You don't have to take my word for it. Look at it historically, whether it's been Democrats who have had the majorities in the Oval Office, Republicans who have had the majorities and been in Oval Office. Things move relatively slowly, and practically no one can ramrod a large basket agenda through the mix of things, no matter what. We just don't live in that kind of space and time because of how closely those majorities are kept, that's a possibility. We're certainly not in a veto-proof majority kind of space where we have 2/3 of one party in either of the houses of Congress. So it's going to be compromised. There are going to be lots of things that are talked about, but then the practical reality on what actually happens is going to be a different thing altogether. So I would say if you're on the Republican side of things, win with graciousness. And if you're on the Democrat side of things, I would say keep looking, because there are going to be lots of possibilities for compromise, and certainly midterm elections are going to be here in 2 years. I know that's a little quick to say that, but they're going to be here very, very quickly, and the people are going to have a voice again to say what they think about these next couple of years as those legislative things move forward. So I just wanted to talk about that in terms of reflecting on what actually happened. Now let's talk markets. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about what this means. Well, we had a very, very large move in the stock markets, generally speaking, in the positive the day after the election. Don't want to burst the bubble for anybody. I'm thankful for that. It's very nice to see that, but that's not sustainable. It just isn't. Too euphoric, in my opinion, too euphoric on that day afterward. There's going to be some moderation as the markets begin to realize again that even though there are certain things which are postulated, very few, if any, of those things are actually going to become law. That's just the nature of how these things work. So yes, I'm more modest in terms of my expectations. It's going to be interesting to see what kinds of things are going to be compromised, meaning that those where there's going to be some agreement in Congress to be able to move certain agenda items forward, but it's almost guaranteed that, at least as they're postulated up front, is not going to be the end result, at least not without some other things attached to it or taken away from it. So again, not wanting to prick the balloon too much, but just have a good and healthy expectation for what we expect market-wise. Let me put it differently. Market's not going to go straight up from here. It's just not. And you don't have to believe me. Look in our history. It never has for sustained periods of time. We have days like we had the day after the election. By the way, we've also had the opposite, which has happened the day after the election as well. Neither one of them sustained because the market comes around, usually within a couple of weeks or so, and understands that it's probably not going to be the best case scenario, and it's probably not going to be the worst case scenario. So then the focus refocuses back onto the things that the market knows, specifically how's the economy doing, where are we with interest rates, where are we with inflation, inflation? Where are we with the expectations of growth going forward? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about where the markets are. We've had a very incredible year to date, and I say very incredible because 2023 was a very positive year as measured by our most popular stock indices. However, if you take the proverbial layers of the onion back a little bit, you'll see, and you've heard me say this in previous updates this year, it's a relatively small basket of stocks which have done very, very well, which have powered the indexes. Whether we're talking about the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the NASDAQ Composite, or the S&P 500 being the most popular ones that are out there. So you want to be mindful that while the indexes may look very, very good, it's actually a relatively small basket of companies which have done well. I'm going to bring up ones that haven't done well just to provide that comparison for discussion here. Look at oil and energy stocks. I mean, I look at companies like Chevron, Texaco, BP, Amoco, ExxonMobil. Actually, ExxonMobil has done pretty positive this year, but BP, Amoco, down about 12% this year. So there are a notable number of companies which have done not so great this year, even though the indexes would give the impression that, quote, everything has done well. So first, have an understanding about where the markets are. Secondly, going forward, what can we expect? Well, we've got some headwinds in front of us here. It would be unnatural to expect that 2025 would grow at the same rate that we've seen now in 23 and 24. It just is. Again, you don't have to believe me. Look at history being the case where we have had two above average years. At a certain point, we got to run below the average to get, wait for it, the average. Right? That's how it works. That's how it goes together. So I think having a healthy expectation about what we can expect for the balance of the year and into 2025 is very, very important during this time. Second big item that's on the radar screen economically right now, we're coming into the Christmas retail season, ready or not. Now that we're post-election, we're going to get about a half breath before we get to Thanksgiving, and then we're into all things Christmas, although judging by my Lowe's and Home Depot, it's already Christmas season based upon the decorations that are at the front door whenever you walk in. But relative to the consumer, looking at how the consumer is going to spend during this Christmas retail season is going to be very indicative about confidence, strength, and ability to be able to spend going forward. And you say, well, why am I spending some time on that or noting that? Remember that our economy is approximately 2/3 to 3/4 a function of consumer spending. Meaning, as the consumer spends in this country, so goes our economy. And so if the consumer slows down spending, we have a slowdown in growth, generally speaking. Consumer ramps up spending, generally speaking, we have an increase in growth in our economy. It's not pure one-to-one, but it's not too far away in terms of understanding how our economy grows. So the Christmas retail season, mostly discretionary spending. Again, not mandatory. We're not talking rents, mortgages, car payments, and electric bills. We're talking about mostly discretionary spending. Tends to be a good indication about the confidence and the financial ability for the consumer to continue to spend. I'm going to be watching that very closely to see where that is. Some of the retailers, the analysts that follow the big box retailers specifically, are showing some modest levels of confidence at the front end about the ability for the consumer to spend at or even slightly above where last year's levels are. I'm still out on that. I'm still watching very closely because remember, we've got higher interest rates. We've had significant amounts of inflation in housing and automobiles. So there's a lot of strain on those month-to-month budgets for a lot of people out there. I'm curious to what that's going to mean for ongoing spending, especially for discretionary kinds of things like the Christmas retail season. So we're going to be watching that very closely, and that's going to give hopefully some indication as we get into the later parts of it, how Q1 and Q2 of 2025 look. That's going to be a very big deal. Another big item that's sitting out there, and I don't want to blush past the rest of this year or too much of 2025 too quickly, but I do want to remind you that at the end of 2025, you've heard me say this now a couple of times, and I've talked with many of you individually about it, at the end of 2025, so not this year, but the end of next year, there is a whole collection of tax laws which are getting ready to sunset. They were implemented in 2017, but the way that was able to get through Congress is there was agreement that a whole basket of them would sunset or revert back to where they were and even sometimes beyond where they were at the end of 2025. Well, that clock is very nearly here at the end of next year. So this current Congress are going to be the ones who are tasked with either extending that sunset, meaning not to have it sunset, and maybe to have it sunset a little bit later, maybe to negotiate some things that are allowed to sunset, others that are not allowed to sunset, or maybe just allow all of them to sunset altogether. We don't know at this point. We're watching that very closely as we get into Q1, Q2 of next year, 2025, ready or not, that's going to be an indication about how Congress is going to address that, because that will have a significant impact on the consumer. Is it possible that tax rates are going to increase on individuals, on corporations, on small businesses? What does that mean in terms of our economy? Is that going to slow things down? What does that mean in conjunction with, I'm going to talk about here in a moment, the Federal Reserve probably cutting rates here a couple of more times? That's usually more of a positive in instigating growth in our economy, but if we have higher tax rates, that tends to be more of a negative in slowing down the growth in our economy. How do those things go together? That brings me to the third item, talking about the Federal Reserve. As of the time, literally, of this recording, we're probably going to have a rate cut today, and then probably at December's meeting have a second rate cut. Both are anticipated at 25 basis points, or 1/4%. What does that mean? Well, generally speaking, and this is very broad-based, does not apply to everything, but just for means of our discussion here, generally speaking, that's good fuel for the equity or stock markets. Not good for folks who have money market accounts and CDs. You're going to see those rates come down a little bit as we've anticipated. But generally speaking, for the stock markets, that can be a positive thing. Now, it isn't binary. It isn't true just because rates go down, the stock market goes up. Not true. There are dozens of variable inputs constantly working on our equity market, so that it may not happen that because interest rates fall that the markets increase. You heard me just say a few moments ago, because of the positive markets we've had here above average in the last couple of years, I'm expecting some moderation, maybe even some pullback in this coming calendar year because of that kind of movement. We just technically are due for that kind of thing. But it's going to be interesting to see what lower interest rates do. Does that help out the residential housing market? Do we have some folks who stop paying rent and then take on mortgages because their mortgage payment might be lower than what they're paying for rent? That is a possibility with a drop in mortgage rates. We're really not there yet, but that with a couple of cuts may end up happening. That creates greater demand in the residential housing market. That may be good for pricing ongoing. So that's the kind of thing that we're watching there economically with regards to the Federal Reserve. I just talked about mortgages, but that also extends to credit cards, lines of credit, student loans, automobile loans. All of those things, not one-to-one, but all of those things are impacted as the Federal Reserve reduces that overnight lending rate, which they have indicated they probably are going to continue to do. So it doesn't mean that they're going to do it every time that they meet. Definitely not in the cards there, but it is something that we're watching very closely. So all right, so that's really the capsule. You got the election, we're beyond it. Don't get too carried away on one day worth of returns and think the market is going to go straight up forever. I promise you it will not. I can't say promise too often, so I like to say it when I can. I promise you it won't go straight up from there. We're watching the Christmas retail season to see where the strength of the consumer is. And then with regards to the Federal Reserve and tax policy, what does that mean with those things that are ahead of us as we look at 2025 in terms of economically? How does that growth ratio look? What does it mean in terms of growth and the strength of our economy going forward? I'm giving you a lot of questions and not too many definitive answers intentionally at this time because we don't have them legitimately right now. But those are the things that are on our radar screen, and certainly as they begin to crystallize in greater fashion, we'll be sure to jump on to another update here to bring you our thoughts regarding it. But as you know, at any time, if you'd like to reach out to us at North Main Financial Group, we'd love to hear from you. Love to chat about where things are for you right now, how 2025 or 24 coming into 25 has been for you, positive things and negative things. What are your thoughts on the election? Love to hear all sides of the equation as folks are sharing about that. And most especially, if you want to share with me your favorite Thanksgiving traditions, I'll share one of my favorite traditions, Thanksgiving, eating. I just love to eat. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I know we do turkey, cranberry, and mashed potatoes and all that kind of stuff. I don't think I would care too much no matter what was on my plate in front of me. I just love the opportunity that's focused around eating, and I enjoy that kind of space. But send me your pictures, especially if you've got certain traditions that you enjoy. And as we get into the Christmas and Hanukkah seasons as well, those traditions there, your plans for travel, to be with family, all those kinds of things, always enjoy hearing from you there. Well, friends, it's always good to be with you. I appreciate so much your time giving it to me here as we go through this update. At any time, always feel free to reach out to us. And until that next time, I'll look forward to chatting with you soon.